Good afternoon, Patriots, and welcome to the 69th audio chat on the Q News Patriot Rumble Channel series. I am the Q News Patriot, joined today by a medical criminality roundtable spanning the entire spectrum. My name is SG Anon. In the Great Awakening journey, one of the things that is compelling people into an awakened mindset and a forward posture of understanding in the world and about the nature of their world is the medical profiteering and the medical industrial complex. Since 2020, we've seen on display a callous disregard for human compassion in our health and wellness space, decency in our doctor spaces, and certainly with respect to patients out there, a lack of respect, not only for the human being as a human being, but also for one's own intuitive guidance about one's own health. All of our guests today have been exposed to the medical profiteering complex in one form or another. At this point, I think we could call it the criminality cartel that is Big Pharma or the Big Pharma run health system. And so I'd like to get into all of our basic stories here in just a moment and set us up for our discussion today. But first of all, thank all of you for joining me. I very much appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Well, let's get right on down to it. My audience is very familiar with Gail from the Former Feds group. The Former Feds is heavily engaged in the documentation and the cataloging of the hospital homicide complex, the medical profiteering and murder complex that has been heaped onto the world in a much more obvious way in the last 4 to 6 years. Gail, if you don't mind, for my audience out there, again, they're meeting you for either the second or third time now at this point.
Sure.
So the entire story is probably well covered. But for those out there that haven't seen you on air together with us before, do you mind to give us just a short coverage of how you arrived at this particular point and what your backstory is?
Sure. Yeah. So, and they can, of course, I don't know what episode number it is, but there is an episode with my full story out there. So I entered this battle, I guess I was in the medical freedom battle before I got sick, but I really jumped into action when the hospital here in Plano, Texas, tried to basically murder me. It was, it was by hospital homicide by the protocols. And that was in December of 2021. I went into the hospital because I needed some oxygen support. And we happened to go to a hospital that is a couple miles from our house where a prominent politician, some people might know him, Colonel Allen West, we knew he had received the FLCC protocol at that hospital with ivermectin, budesonide, and hydroxychloroquine and vitamins. And so that's why we chose that hospital. And my husband, who is a former nurse, and he is also a former Army officer. He was a chemical weapons and biological weapons officer. So he knew COVID was a bioweapon based on his experience. And so he took that protocol, and they promised him they would give it to me, that they said, yes, we do that protocol. And then they made him leave. I say because they didn't want witnesses now, but and I remained in the ER for a day and a half. It was about 36, 37 hours before they brought me up to an ICU unit. And by that time, they had me on very high oxygen and a BiPAP, and they just kept increasing the oxygen. I did not know at that time that is a way that they get people to the mechanical vent, is they over oxygenate you, and they use that oxygen to harm, not to help. And so when I did get up to the ICU, this is a very short version. So, I saw people on vents, I saw people dying, but I had told them I did not want remdesivir. I did not want a vent. I wanted the ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, and budesonide, and the vitamins, the FLCC protocol. And the doctor I had met the doctor. Now I'm like 2 days in, and he came in on the 5th, and he asked me some questions. He asked me if I was vaccinated, and I said no. And I was like, I work from home. I tried to be very polite. And I said no. And he patted me on the hand and he said, I'm so sorry, Mrs. Seiler, but you're going to die based on the fact that I was not vaccinated. And I got upset. I said, you're fired, doc. I need somebody who knows what they're doing. I called my husband. I said, this crazy doctor says I'm going to die. And my husband was like, you're not going to die. You just got there. They didn't, and he was arguing with the doctor. He said, and the doctor said, her only chance is remdesivir and a vent. And even then she's probably going to die. And he said, my husband told me, take off your mask, take off the mask and speak. And so I did. And he said, no, she doesn't need a vent. Her voice is very strong. It's very strong. She does not need a vent. And I want you to give her the medications that they promised. And they would not do that. And I told Dr. Quach, I said, since you gave me a terminal diagnosis, I want two things. I want the right to try. Trump signed the Right to Try Act. I want the right to try ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, and budesonide. And he said no. And I said, I have a right to have my priest come and give me my final sacraments. And he said no. And so he said no to those things. My family tried to get in. They would not let my family in. I obviously could not get out of bed. I was dizzy and on a lot of oxygen and could not leave on my own. I needed my family. And so from then on, it was a constant battle to advocate for things like I didn't have water for 7 days. They wouldn't give me water, no food, no nutrition. I didn't even have an IV bag. It was at least day 5 that I was there before a nurse came in and saw that there was no IV fluid going into me. And she had a fit and said, this should be nonstop, blah, blah, blah. But so my daughter, she got a hold of she actually somehow got into the Clay Clark event that was in town that weekend. And just was going around telling everybody they were trying to kill her mama. And Chad Prather actually brought her
bless
to,
her.
I know she was like a crazy woman, but she wasn't going to let him kill her mama. And so Chad Prather was there and brought her back to meet Dr. Bartlett and Dr. Artis. And Dr. Bartlett helped my family advocate for budesonide. He said, forget the ivermectin. They're never going to give it to you. Push for budesonide. And they did relent and give me budesonide. They would not give it to me every 4 hours like he recommended, but they gave me 2 doses. I think it was like 10 or 12 hours apart. And Dr. Quach came in the next day after that, and he said, I've never seen this before. You're getting better. You're starting to improve. And I thought he was seeing the light. And I was like, hey, imagine if you gave it to me every 4 hours, and if, I don't know, throw in some ivermectin. It's not like I'm asking for eye of newt. And he said, no, he wouldn't do it. And then they started skipping doses of the budesonide or replacing it with albuterol, which isn't the same thing. Budesonide is an inhaled steroid. That's why it works for pneumonia. And the whole time I'm getting weaker and weaker, and I'm not able to get out of bed. So I'm stuck in a bed and my legs are getting weak. I think, and I no nutrition. But Dr. Quach did then come to me and my husband and say, I will let your priest come in, provided you agree to remdesivir. And so we had a dilemma, and I needed my priest. So I said, okay. And then I was hoping that we could get him in there quickly. but he did say, if you can get me in, I'm coming. And they let him in the next morning, but they did get 1 round of remdesivir in me, 1 round. And I'll tell you what it feels like. It feels like, I texted my daughter and I said it felt like poison to my heart, but what it really felt like was kind of poison to my heart. But like, if you touch fiberglass, that's what it feels like going through your veins. It feels like that feeling you get when you touch fiberglass. So I knew it was harmful to me. And I was very aware of, don't take any pain pills. Don't let them give you anything for anxiety. Be calm, because otherwise they will give you something for anxiety and put you out and do what they want. And so my priest came, gave me my sacraments. He said, don't let him turn on the TV. Don't let him, don't take any more remdesivir, for the love of God. And so we said no to the remdesivir. After that, the doctor was very upset. Because I shouldn't have had to make the deal, but he saw it as we went back on our deal. So then he started saying to my husband, what do you want me to do when she codes? When she has a heart attack, basically. And I said, I don't feel like I'm going to have a heart attack. I don't feel like I'm going to code. Am I going to code? Is there something that's going to make me code? And my husband told him, well, she's a full code. So I want you to resuscitate her. And he said, well, then I have to put her on a vent. And he said, no, you don't. You can bag her. You can use the bag. You can bag her and you can call me and I will tell you what I want you to do. I will come up and I will tell you what to do after that. But I will never give you blanket permission to vent her, because then it will happen. And so that was another indication to me that they were trying to kill me. And so there were a lot of these little things. There was abusiveness. There were abusive nurses. I had bruises all over me. I finally got water on the 7th day because they brought in a glass of water with laxatives in it and wanted me to drink it. And I said, why can I have water with laxatives in it, but I can't have just plain water? I can't drink that because I'll dehydrate and get sicker faster. I'll deteriorate faster. And so I wouldn't drink it. And I was reaching for something and I knocked it over, and a patient care tech named Justice, who was her first day, she came in and she said, oh, Miss Gail, you spilled your water. Do you want me to get you some fresh water? And I said, yeah, would you? And ice too? Because my mouth was, and I hadn't been bathed, I hadn't been cleaned, I hadn't had any mouth care, my hair was matted. I was in terrible shape. And she brought me water, and a nurse came in and saw me and said, oh, you're nothing by mouth. Why do you have water? And I said, I don't know who told you that. I can clearly drink water. And she goes, oh, I'm going to go get you an Ensure. And when she went to go do it, the doctor stopped her and said, no, you can't. She's nothing by mouth. She can have the ice from now on. And so at least I could let ice melt or put ice in my mouth from that day on. And my daughter asked for vitamin C, and they told her there was a national shortage of vitamin C. So they only saved it for the most dire cases. And she said, well, you told my mom she's going to die. That sounds pretty serious. And my husband and my daughter kept trying to come up, and they had this security guard that was always on the lookout and would stop them. And they were really working hard. They got a lawyer, and my daughter would call me. She would call me every day. She started calling me and telling me she was watching my chart on the back end. And she said, Mom, they have you as a DNR, a do not resuscitate. And I would tell the doctors and nurses, I'm not a DNR. I'm not a DNR. And they still had it in my records. And the doctors and nurses would say, yes, you are. You are a DNR. And I would tell them, I am not a DNR. I I can make this decision. I'm not a DNR. And we even got an attorney to go to the administration and try to get that changed. Because if I code or something happens to me, they're going to go by what's in the chart. And so they never changed it the whole time I was there. And so on the 14th day, on the 11th day I was there, on the 14th of December, my husband came up with two bills. He was working with Senator Bob Hall and our House Rep Matt Shaheen, and he came up with two bills attached to a cease and desist, and they wouldn't take it. And it basically, those two bills in Texas were put in place. They were signed months before that to ensure that patients were not isolated. And so they would not honor them. And he called 911 and the police came. He actually asked for the sheriff, because the sheriff, is the one that is supposed to protect your constitutional rights. And the sheriff did not come, but some police officers did. They would not enforce the law. And so he said, will you do a welfare check on my wife? And they said, she's fine. She's in a hospital. We don't do welfare checks in hospitals. And he said, she's not fine. I wouldn't have called you if she was fine. And so eventually, one of the young officers did say, he said, I'll do it. And he came up in his garb, garb in all of the PPE, and he stood at the door, and he let the floor nurse, William Fripp, stand in the room while he asked me if I was okay. And I only had one shot to tell him. And I told him all of the abuse that was going on, everything that was happening to me, and I told that officer, I said, if I stay here, they're going to murder me. And I used those words. And he said, oh my God, we don't have a protocol for this. No protocol for it. And he left. And he left me there. And I thought for sure I was going to die that night, because that floor nurse just walked out of the room shaking his head, smiling. And God sent me a very good nurse that night, and a really good patient care tech. And so the nurse's name was Grace, and Justice was the patient care tech again. And so I really think that was prophetic. And then in the morning, I had a nurse named Faith. And so she came in, and she was nice. But my husband called me at 7:30 that next morning. This was on the 15th, so the 12th day I was there. And he said, I have everything I need to take care of you at home. I have a company that's going to serve as the as kind of a consultant, and I'm going to take you home hospice, because they gave you a terminal diagnosis. And they still were telling him I was going to die. They said I would need a double lung transplant, and even if I lived, and they needed to let me go. They kept trying to convince them to euthanize me. And so my husband said, if I get in that room, do you want to go? Because I don't want to barge in if you're not going to go home with me. And I said, well, hell yeah, I want to go. If you can get in here, I'm going. But I didn't know how he was going to get in, because you had to be buzzed into the ICU, and it's an ICU. And so, there was a security guard that was, knew exactly what him and my daughter looked like. And so, he got in. He walked in at 9:30, about 9:30, he walked into the hospital. My daughter was like 10 minutes behind him, so she got stuck in the hallway. But when he walked in, there was a young guy at the security desk, and that old guy that always was looking out for him was not there. He was in the bathroom. And so my husband walked in, put down, he dropped the papers with the cease and desist and the House and Senate bill. And he said, you've been keeping me away from my wife. I'm going up to get my wife. And the kid was like, okay, sir. And he walked right by him. The elevator doors were open. He got on that elevator and the ICU doors were wide open. And he walked into my room and he said, honey, I'm here. And I said, well, I was like, there's my Huckleberry. And we call him Huckleberry to this day. But they chased him up there and they said, you need to get out of here. You need to leave. And he said, I'm not going anywhere. You're not, my wife's not your guinea pig. You're not going to kill my wife. And he started barking out orders because when he walked up, I was completely naked, nothing covering me, freezing, dirty, treated like an animal. And he was mad as hell. He was mad as hell because he had been a nurse. And he started, where's her privacy curtain? Where's her covers? Where's her this and that? Get her cleaned up. And he just started barking out orders, and they were afraid because my husband's a big guy. And it was one thing when they were talking to him on the phone or down in the lobby, but he was big as life in my room, and he saw the condition I was in. And so they called 911. We actually called 911 too, because we needed to get out of there. And I think Senator Hall called 911 because we had 6 police officers out there. And here's the shocking thing to me, because we had very much been all about back the blue our whole life. Our businesses always catered to that. Those police officers were not there to help me. They were there to keep me there in the hospital. They were there to get my husband out of that room. And they did everything that they could to try that. My daughter, she recorded some of it in the hallway. Thankfully she was stuck out there, but she called everybody. She called the attorney down. She called Senator Hall. Senator Hall spoke to my husband and said, hey, if they try to get you to leave, just go peacefully, don't get arrested, and we will find another way. And he said, yes, sir. And then when he hung up the phone, he told me, he said, they're going to have to tase me and drag me out of here in handcuffs because I'm not leaving without you. And we went back and forth, back and forth. They tried to gaslight me, tell me I was going to die. He can't take care of you. And I told them, I looked at my husband, I said, do you have everything you need to take care of me? He said, I do. And I told the woman doctor that came in to gaslight me, I said, I trust my husband, and I would rather go home and even if I die, have him try to save me than be murdered at your hands, because if I stay here, I will die. I will be killed. And eventually they brought in a against medical advice form. I said, I'm not leaving against medical advice. I'm leaving home hospice. And I'm actually leaving because of medical advice, because I have been told by doctors, if I stay here, you will kill me. And so my husband just rewrote the form eventually, because he knew what goes on a home hospice form. And that was important, because if you have a terminal diagnosis and you leave home hospice, they're supposed to, they don't get out of the liability of what they did to you. And so after that, they went totally hands off. The floor nurse, William Fripp, he stood at the door tapping his watch to my husband, like, come on, you're on my time now. And my husband had to go out and get a wheelchair. He had brought a little bottle of oxygen, small bottle of oxygen, maybe about 30 minutes worth. And so he, I thought I was just going to hop into that wheelchair, but I couldn't bear weight on my, like, he had to literally get me into the wheelchair and get me on the on the oxygen, and I was on 60 liters of oxygen. So I had to go from 60 liters to 15 liters very quickly. And it took me a bit. I struggled with that. And my husband got me switched over and he said, we got to go. And when he went out the door, William Fripp told him, he goes, I'm going to take you a shortcut. And my husband had, I was right above the emergency room. So my husband was in my room so quick, but he took us down this long, windy hall using up the oxygen much longer than it would have taken us. But he didn't want anybody to see the condition I was in, because I was in terrible condition. And he took us down the service elevator where they take the bodies down to the morgue, and out where the funeral homes pick those at the dock where they pick those bodies up. And it was really to send us a message. And that's where he had my daughter park the vehicle. And so while my husband was getting me in the truck, William said to my daughter, your mom's going to have a heart attack. And if she stays here, we will revive her once. And, but if she goes home, she'll die. And my daughter was like, get behind me, Satan, right? Like, she was not happy. And then he turned to my husband and he said, mark my words, she'll be dead by tonight, if not by the time you get her home. And he flipped around on his heels and he looked at him and he said, you better hope she is, because I know my wife. And if she lives, she's never going to stop coming after you guys. And she's never going to stop talking about it. And I think he said, even God can't help you. And then he threw out some choice words, got in the car, drove me home. And it was a hard road, but he saved my life. He saved my life. Using the same protocol that I was denied. So this is 12 days. And now I'm not just needing a little bit of oxygen, but I'm in critical condition on 60 liters of oxygen. And he saved me with ivermectin, vitamins, and budesonide. So if they had given me those things immediately with a little bit of oxygen, I had been 1 or 2 days tops in that hospital, just like Colonel Allen West was. He was in the hospital for 2 days, got that protocol, and he was out. And now I'm with Former Feds Freedom Foundation, and we have collected these stories, and we've got about 1,200, and they're coming in all the time. And we collect these stories, and most people were not fortunate enough to live. And we have people calling us even this week, to do hospital rescues and help them advocate. So it's still happening. But all of the stories are the same. On chbmp.org, we have a list of 25 commonalities that every story has. And it starts with isolation, and they take you through the steps and the denial of safe and effective treatments that are safe enough for like budesonide. They give it to preemies. It's that safe. And the denial of those protocols is very deliberate. And then the push for the deadly ones. And so that is, and we've started collecting stories of people who got the frontline doctor protocol and didn't have these problems and lived and didn't have, didn't go on a vent or whatever. And so I think we have about 70 survivor stories. There's not many survivors. So, so that's my story.
Gail, every time I hear your accounting of the things that occurred in December, that particular year, it just floors me even more. There's more parts that stick out. There's greater details that come through. The flavor of what actually occurred here becomes greater and greater in focus, much more precise and sharp. And if there ever was a need for that next level justice and accountability, certainly it's encapsulated in that story. And, unfortunately, I think that story has expanded itself really in recent years off of a long history of organized suffering in the medical community. This attitudinal shift through academia and through the training of what you would call quote unquote healthcare professionals, the clear bent towards therapeutics that actually create more cause for to have more therapeutics long term. And much of this without any serious regard to the effects of the human being, the effects that occur on the body, the effects that occur on the anatomy, what we're actually doing here when we're trying to quote unquote care for people. And the reason I keep using that term is because what floored me so much is I could not distinguish in your story that recounting just a moment ago, I could not distinguish that story from the story I recently heard on this show from a gentleman who was wrongfully imprisoned for speaking out. And the experience of jail and the experience of this hospital story that you've recounted, they're fundamentally indistinguishable to me. And doctors are, ancestrally regarded as healers, those that seek
Yeah.
the wellness and the amplification of the human being, those that always put the comfort, the compassion side of things first. And this, of course, is what the fundamental basis of being a healthcare professional, I think, is supposed to be about.
Well, and
Shifting.
here's a recent thing too. I'm just going to this is the first time I've said it since it happened, but my husband has been indicted for what happened in the hospital, so we are now working through that. When I started speaking out, they found a way to indict him.
Absolutely remarkable. Well, please extend an invitation to him for this particular platform. Should he desire it, it will remain open.
Okay, I will.
Shifting gears here off of that, David, your story is sort of a very similar flavor, right? Just a longer burn, a much slower burn, but the same attitudinal disposition towards fundamental torture, towards purposeful harm, purposeful discomfort being created, very personal in nature. You also are not brand new to the audience, but it has been a little while since we've been on air. Do you care to give us an overview of your experience with this particular medical industrial complex and the steps that you all are taking on your end?
Yes, thank you so much. How's the audio? Because I have these earbuds. Is it okay?
Loud and clear.
Okay. So I think I was last on in April of this year. It was before I had filed my claim under the Federal Tort Claims Act and my notice of intent to sue. So since I was last on with you, I don't remember the show number. That's completed. But yeah, I'm a scoliosis patient. I had the first operation when I was 16 years old, which was implantation of what's called Harrington rod and thoracic spine fusion and some hooks that pull because of rotation of the rib cage, right? And so that was the first foray into medical care. And then I went on to school and college and had a career and all. And then I started having problems. And I would say the mid 90s, I started having problems, but I really didn't seek treatment for it. I just thought I had a bad back. And ultimately, in about 2005, I had to start seeking treatment. And then they discovered that the lumbar discs below the big, huge 13 level fusion had all blown out because of absorbing all the shock, right, over a 30-year period. So then that led to radical surgery number two, where I had lumbar pedicle screw implementation and it's all bolted into the back of my pelvis. So now, in essence, I have absolutely zero motion in my torso. And that's when I became an intractable pain patient in 2000. Well, that surgery was January 2009. So I have arachnoiditis, which is adhesions in the spinal canal and the tailbone, the cauda equina, that's very painful, and have conditions that cause nonstop, intractable daily pain that cannot be relieved by any other measure than inexpensive, effective opioid pain medication. So I have been treated with opioid pain medication for years and years. Then I moved states suddenly in 2022 because we lost the lease. My 82-year-old mom lives with me. So here I am, a disabled person trying to run household and take care of older person, older parent. And we went back to North Texas where I had grown up, and that's where I got dumped off all my pain medication. The medical board had passed rules that said that the long-term use of opioids for chronic and intractable pain was not appropriate or not effective or whatever line of nonsense they're using these days. And they tortured me straight out. So I was put into complete withdrawal, complete uncontrolled pain, cortisol shock, um, insomnia, you name it, new pain that I'd never had before. And they wanted to only offer me a medicine called buprenorphine, which is used for people with substance use disorder. Well, I don't have substance use disorder. I have daily intractable pain. So that's when I found out that all this was happening across the country because I had no idea. And I learned about the 2016 guidelines for prescribing opioids and this agenda to remove opioids from treatment protocol, and that this had been going on nationwide, and started networking with people to try to figure out what was going on. That's when I learned that there were 6 states at the time that had intractable pain patient laws to protect patients from dose caps and things like that. And then we immediately made arrangements to move to Arizona, where there was an intractable pain law in place. But that doesn't guarantee success. And the DEA has been poking around in Arizona now. But anyway, I got reinstated on a short-acting opioid, thankfully, and other medications, and have a really good pain doctor, and things are okay for me. Not stellar, but okay. But then I continued to learn and network with experts and doctors. And then I heard oral arguments in January of 2024 in a case at the Supreme Court called Relentless versus the Department of Commerce. And that's the case where the plaintiff attorney asked the Supreme Court to overturn the Chevron deference doctrine, which was a case from the 80s where the Supreme Court gave these agencies the power. In other words, the judicial system would defer to the agencies and their experts when they made rules and regulations, which became de facto laws, right? So they were exempt from judicial review. That's how we ended up with this out of control bureaucracy with the agencies in the government over the past 40 years. So when I heard that case, I thought, a little light went on and said, wow, if that happened, that would be amazing. And so in February, I sat down at the laptop and started writing and gathering all the research and that I had been networking, gained from networking with people. And I had worked in administrative law for 15 years, right, before I became disabled. But I'd been out of the workforce for 15 years. So it took a couple of weeks to reset my little brain and stick to the facts and write my document. And so I ended up with this 36-page paper. And then that became the basis of our Federal Tort Claims Act. That I filed it on May 24th, I believe is when I filed it. And I'm inviting other patients who've been harmed, like dumped off their pain medication, had a forced taper, had a pharmacy refuse to fill a legal prescription. There's qualified harms that a person can file a claim for. And we intend to take it to district court. So I don't know when that, there's a 6 months process that we're in right now, the informal settlement conference process, and then we'll have to file a district court claim probably in early 2025. But I'm going after them. I'm suing the directors of CDC, DEA, DOJ for negligent and unlawful activity, and basically the state-sanctioned torture program, and I call it mass murder program, of people who've been stable pain patients on their opioid medication for years with no problems, passing their urine screens, and now they're being dumped off their medications, and some aren't living. And people are now in hospital not being treated appropriately with pain medication, and they're not surviving surgeries. That's how bad that's where we are right now. So, the lawsuit, if you want to join the lawsuit, let me give that plug. We have a Facebook page called The Pain Lawsuit, and you can reach me at thepainlawsuit@gmail.com if you have questions. And we're still getting claims filed for that right now. So I'm going for it.
Remarkable and powerful. One of the fundamental common themes between your story and Gail's, and I would imagine TrutherMike's as well as we move into our next segment here, is the sheer contemptible arrogance that is displayed from one human being to another. we are all one, we the people under God. We all have different interpretations of our divinity and our spiritual nature and what that means. But there are fundamental decency principles, I think, that underpin the success of all of human civilization going back centuries. And we seem to have really gotten away from that in a profound and impactful way. And I thank both of you for the work that you are continuing to do to highlight that, not only just from the spiritual side, but from the specific example, the kinetic action point. And that leads me over to TrutherMike. My understanding, sir, is that we got connected actually for this roundtable initially, and you yourself are also an extreme pain patient and someone who has a fundamental experience in a very personal way. Without without divulging sensitive information, what can you tell us about your own experience, sir?
Well, the funny thing is, my experience is very similar to both of theirs in the sense that it's pretty obvious that everything they're doing in this medical community and the lies that the CDC put out and how the DEA is handling it, and these killing fields in the hospitals from COVID, from the remdesivir and the intubation to taking away life-saving opioid medications that the only thing you can do for intractable pain patients. They know that this is the only thing that helps. They know that they need them, and yet they're taking them away. To me, it's just so clear that it's just like it says on the Georgia Guidestones, cull the population to 50 million. That is their goal. And these are just ways they're doing it. I mean, they're coming after us. We all know they're coming after us from the food to the water to the air with the chemtrails. And they're doing it with pharmaceuticals, not just in the pharmaceuticals they're giving us, but in the pharmaceuticals they're withholding from us. My situation that's similar to David's is that I was born with severe scoliosis and severe what's the other one where you're bent forward, scoliosis, and I forget the term of it. I'm sorry, but I have a twisted spine. Born with it, back pain my whole life. Got up until about my 30s where it was just so unbearable that the doctor finally put me on opioid medications. We found a stable dose, and had it not been for those, I would have not been able to continue to work. And with a stable dose, I went the next 13 years on my job on the same and worked a job where I was working for 7 years with one of the largest hotel casinos in Las Vegas, with a bad back, believe it or not, in the belt department, lifting heavy luggage and walking 15 to 20 miles a day. That's what with a stable dose of opioids allowed me to do. I was on the job for over 7 years. I was almost halfway to retirement. I had a good future. I owned a home. My pension was looking good. I had made some decent investments. All I had to do was finish up the next 12 and a half years, and I would have retired comfortably. But because of this whole war on opioids, CDC put out this recommendation back in 2016, and the DEA took it and ran with it like it was law and started going after all the doctors, having the doctors take away the opioids from the pain patients. They closed my doctor down, had to find a new doctor, and my condition was inoperable. Right, no surgeon would touch me. This new doctor, refused to continue the medications that worked effectively for 13 years. And as a responsible pain patient, my UAs always came up clean, didn't drink, didn't smoke, ate healthy. I mean, as a model pain patient, but nonetheless, they took them away. And the only thing, I was unable to return to work as soon as that happened. And I told the doctor, I said, look, you got to get me back to work. I'm going to lose my house. I'm going to lose everything I own. Basically, they told me I had one option, and that was the epidural spine injections, the epidural steroid injections. People know them as ESIs. And I want to note that I want to point out that this is the #1 procedure that they push hard on any and every pain patient that goes to a pain management doctor complaining about opioids, or excuse me, about complaining about back pain. This is their go-to. Now, here's the problem with that. All right, these are not effective for most patients. All right, and not only do they have very little efficacy, if they help at all, it's minimal, and it's maybe a couple of weeks, a couple of months at best, and then you have to keep going in and getting more and more. And the problem is they're extremely dangerous. For one, the medication they're using, one of their favorites, is called Depomedrol, which it says right on the insert, not intended for the spine, which is what they're using them for. It says intended only for joints like knees and elbows. Second of all, it's not even approved. Depo-Medrol was never approved by the FDA. And it's also been banned in many, many major countries. I don't know if it's 8 or 12. The info that my research varies on that, but at least 8 major countries have banned it because it's known to cause one of the most painful conditions a human being can cause, which both David and I have. You mentioned it, adhesive arachnoiditis. And I'm going to tell you, I went in, they did 2 series of shots on me. The first series didn't help, but didn't hurt. But after the second series of shots, it destroyed me. It tripled, if not quadrupled, my pain. And here's what happened. I walked into the doctor's office, able-bodied. Yeah, I dealt with back pain, but for the most part, I was able-bodied, gainfully employed, enjoying my hobbies. But after that second series of injections that went wrong, and I'll explain how in a second, I wound up basically being rolled out in a wheelchair and have been bedridden 24/7 ever since. So they took away what was working for 13 years and forced a procedure on me with a drug that not only not FDA approved, been banned in multiple countries, and they were using for an off-label research that they know had low efficacy, and crippled me. That's what caused me to go on disability. If they had just kept me on the stable dose, I'd be about 1.5 years away from retirement. So I was actually crippled by the war on opioids. And what's even worse is they know they've done that, and I cannot find a single doctor, and I've seen many, that is willing to even reasonably come close to reasonably treating the pain that that has caused. And they don't want to admit that that's what happened. So the whole thing is a travesty. They know, and when you try and talk to the doctors about this, they don't want you to even utter the words adhesive arachnoiditis. I've been roadblocked at every attempt to get a diagnosis, and I finally got one from the world's leading expert, Dr. Forrest Tennant out of Covina, California. So if anybody out there thinks they have it, contact him. He is the world's leading expert on intractable pain and its major causes, with one of them being adhesive arachnoiditis. It took me 5 years to get a diagnosis. Doctor after doctor did not want to talk about it, shot me down. I had one doctor tell me, you got to stop saying that word. Excuse me. I said, what word? He goes, arachnoiditis. I said, well, why is that? If that's the condition I have, I need to know so I can find the best treatment. That's just logical. He says, well, as soon as you say that word, no doctor's going to want to touch you. And not only that, but when I tried to get the test done, which is an MRI with and without contrast, I met resistance. Not only resistance, but flat out sabotage. To me, it's pretty obvious that they know these injections can cause that, and they're doing everything they can to keep that hush hush. So these doctors, they know it, and they don't care because it's a huge cash cow. They make a fortune off these. For example, I've looked at my Medicare statements, and to go see my doctor and get my medications refilled once a month, they get paid $75. They get paid hundreds and thousands of dollars every time they do epidural injections on patients. So it's money driven for the doctors, just like the vaccines, if they hit their quotas, no different. The whole medical community is just completely corrupt. And I believe this is being pushed by the deep state, because here's the thing. Adhesive arachnoiditis is so excruciating. The doctors say the pain is comparable to that of metastasized bone cancer. Now think about that. When it puts you at a constant state of pain that's an 8 or a 9, how long can a person take that without getting effective pain management? Most people don't. A lot of people wind up washing down their coffee with a bullet, cashing out. And the ones that are true hard fighters, a lot of them, you've got grandmas that have never even smoked a joint in their life. They're turning to street drugs. And isn't it funny how right when they took away the opioids, the prescription opioids from the pain patients, knowing that people had no option but to either suicide or the street, that's when the street drugs became tainted with fentanyl. And everybody started ODing on it. To me, it's very obvious. This is just it's a kill shot. They're trying to get rid of, like you've heard them say it a million times, get rid of useless eaters, and they want to start with the least valuable of all, which are the elderly and the disabled. And that's basically, so it's, how's this any different than what they're doing in the kill centers with the COVID protocols? It is just so obvious that everything they're doing is to cull the population, and it's just absolutely horrendous. I, I can go on, but that's basically the bottom line. And the problem is, had our doctors stepped up and fought for us, as I've had numerous doctors tell me, say, look, I'm so tired of seeing patients suffer. I've had numerous doctors tell me, you clearly have the pathology to warrant long-term, long-acting opioids and more, but my hands are tied. And why are they hands tied? Because of the DEA. They are all terrified that if they go above the recommendation that the CDC put out, that the DA is going to come in, they're going to seize their they're going to arrest them, seize their assets, take their medical license, and put them out of business. So our biggest problem is the DEA, is the fear the doctors have of the DEA. Now, how that's come about is the fact that, and this comes into that Chevron case that David mentioned, prior to that Chevron case, these government agencies like the CDC and the DEA, they had the ability to interpret law as they see fit. All right. And that's how they got away with it, because what happened was the CDC in 2016 put out a recommendation for opioid use for doctors, and they came up with a 90 MME rule. And MME stands for morphine milligram equivalent. Since all pain management, since all pain medicines have different strengths, they said, let's just compare them all to morphine and use that as a rule of thumb. So they said that from now on, you don't give a patient any more than what's equivalent of 90 milligrams of morphine, whether it's oxycodone, Lortab, oxymorphone, whatever it is, it's got to be comparable to the equivalency of 90 milligrams of morphine. Now, there's a lot of problems with that. Number one, you've got different tolerances. Some people are ultra metabolizers, some people are slow metabolizers. And then let's not forget the difference between a 110-pound, 120-pound woman and a 200-pound man. It's going to affect them different. You cannot do a one size fits all. It's absolutely asinine. It makes no sense. You can't tell me that these so-called medical experts don't know that. Bottom line is they don't care, because they know that if a pain patient if they have severe enough pain, like serious and chronic pain, or even worse, intractable pain, which is the worst you can have, that people are going to do whatever they have to do. There's only so much they can take. They're either going to blow their brains out, or they're going to go to street drugs, which now, since they're all tainted with fentanyl, they're going to go by that way. It's just, to me, it's just so obvious. It's a complete kill move. And, for a soft kill, some people say a soft kill for Agenda 21. What they're doing is absolutely horrific. The good news is, like I said, how the DEA and the CDC got away with this, because the CDC, what they used for their guidelines and coming up with this recommendation, was all just junk science, fraudulent and flat out fictional and fraudulent data. For example, what they don't tell you in the mainstream media is that your legitimate pain patient, only 0.6%, 0.6, that's barely over 0.5%, not even 1% of legitimate pain patients ever even become addicted to pain meds. So how many of those could possibly be dying, overdosing? I mean, do the math on that. That's just common sense. Another big one is that the way the coroners report opioid deaths and drug deaths is completely fraudulent. I'll give you a very simple example, and this is all researchable. As a matter of fact, I gave you a link that I hope you're going to put in that I guess you said you were going to put in the description box at the end of the show, to a show that I did with Michael Jaco that will go over all of this and a ton more evidence that will blow your mind. But one just short example is that when the coroners report an opioid death, they do not report them correctly. It's completely false. And I'll give you the example. One Percocet will not kill a child. All right. However, if you take a Percocet will stay in your system for about 3, maybe 5 days, depending on the individual. So if somebody takes one Percocet on a Monday, which is not going to be lethal, it's impossible. But then on Wednesday, they overdose on heroin or fentanyl-laced heroin. Do you know how that death gets reported? It should be reported as the fentanyl-laced heroin that was what really killed them. But no, they don't even mention the fentanyl or the heroin or the fentanyl, which is what really killed them. They list it as an opioid death, as an opioid overdose. This is the statistics and the false data and the lies that the CDC has used to run their whole agenda into their recommendation. And furthermore, and this is the final point and the big one, the CDC came under so much scrutiny from the pain patient advocacy groups for a reclarification of this that they finally admitted a couple of years later that, well, it was just a recommendation. It wasn't meant to be law like the DA used it as. It was only a recommendation, and it was only a recommendation for primary care physicians, family doctors, primary care physicians, and it was only for first-time pain patients, first-time opioid-naive pain patients. In other words, somebody that just recently came into dealing with chronic pain and has never used opioids before. They said, if you use this 90 MME guideline, you're safe. They're not going to overdose. It was not meant for professional pain management doctors that have experience in dealing with pain patients. But yet the DEA took that as law and applied it and went after the professional specialists, the pain management specialists. They have what, 4 or 5 years extra schooling and expertise in this, and they went after them like that. So the bottom line is they took a recommendation and used it as law. And the reason they were able to do that was because at that time they had the power to interpret that as law. The good news is here's what's changing. What David is talking about with this Chevron case is now that we've won the Chevron case, that takes the power away from them. Now they have to prove it in court. And when the truth comes out, the evidence and the lies and the fraud and the junk science they were using is not going to stand up in court. So this is a huge win for us. And it's not just going to help with the opioid patients. I think it will also help with these hospital protocols, with the remdesivir and the intubation and many other things. So, here's the situation we're in. And I think the Chevron is a huge win. And I think it's going to help in many, many situations.
Fundamentally, as we look back on these periods of time and these discussions, we will remember the criminal cartel of the alphabet-mafia, the unelected fourth arm of the U.S. government, as perhaps the greatest criminal conspiracy of all time. And that sort of leads me into my final question. It's sort of a loaded question. It's for all of you out there, and it deals with morality. As we move forward together as we the people, we have to acknowledge that these things are transpiring and have transpired for a very long time. A great deal of just abject evil has been on display, overtaking our institutions, our various pulpits of power, and really the popular discourse, the discussion between one another, the weaponization, for example, of the social sphere with smartphones and technology. So moving forward, having had our discussion up to this point and heard all of your stories and just absolutely, once again, remarkable, what is the answer on the moral side? How do we heal as a people, and how do we repurpose these systems for what they were always intended to do?
Well, if I can start, I would say similar like what we spoke about before. It really comes down to, for us, the people, is just keep doing the shadow work on ourselves, work on getting our moral compasses in alignment as best as we can, living the Christ consciousness, doing the right thing, fighting for truth, and not sitting back for this, coming to our power. It's like the whole Q movement and the thing that we're going through right now. It's not just to take the deep state out of power. It's to wake up America to the power of the Constitution, and how if we actually learn it and utilize it, that we can take this back. The problem is we haven't. The whole reason we're in this boat in the first place is because the American people were apathetic. They fell for the circus and bread, spent way too much time drinking beer, watching football, by the school board, starting from all the way to the bottom, from the school boards, making the kids wear masks and things like that, and doing nothing. We do not have that luxury anymore. We need to start at grassroots and start from the bottom up and going after every one of them, and just work our way up the ladder, and let the military white hats start from the top down, and we work from the bottom up. In the middle, we will meet, and we'll take them out of power, and put good people, good patriots, people who are of service to others in those positions, and once again bring in a government that is truly by the people, for the people.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, and people have to, I always say it, now is not the time to be entertained. It's the time to do everything you can to be informed. Get rid of your cable, turn off the news, they're lying to you. They're if you have a story like this, take action. If you have a protocol story, tell it, speak up, join us. If you have you know, a pain management story where you've been denied those medications, get a hold of David and join the, you know, join the lawsuits. You know, we're trying to hold these people accountable. And at the same time, there's some very good doctors and nurses and scientists that are trying to start a parallel type system, right? So that, because it's not just the medical care, right? It's the research too. All the research is garbage as well. You know, it's whoever pays for it gets the result they want. And so they're, you know, they're trying to support those people. I mean, if the reality is, if you're not paying your doctor, he's not working for you.
And I would add that the era of the pyramid power structure is over. We have to completely dismantle any system that has orders coming from the top all the way to the bottom with no room for individual changes or individual examination of the facts on the ground. This includes the artificial intelligence that's been rolled out at this point. I mean, they want to standardize the whole planet Earth like they did in education back in the 30s and 40s. Well, it's not going to work. It's going to fail. But we have to fight and fight hard because they have perfected that pyramidal power structure, or so they thought. But we woke up. So we're going to keep fighting. Thank you.
Well said with both of you. I couldn't agree more. It's all about stepping up and getting in the fight, just like Scott McKay says, get in the fight. So
Yeah.
amen to that.
Get in the fight and stop being complicit or complacent, not complicit. Well, complacent is kind of complicit, but you know, I mean, it could be, it's your, what kind of world do you want your grandkids? You know, look at all my grandkids back there. I want them to, I want them to be in a safe world where they have freedom and they will never have to say that their Nana didn't fight the fight, because they know it. You know, so
Could not have said it any better myself. And as the father of one, I completely empathize with the posterity focused orientation that all of us need to have. Thank you very much, each of you, for joining the show. I stand with all of you. And if ever a time comes where an important word needs to get out again, a fundamental invitation to all of you on these issues. For the audience out there, I hope you've enjoyed our conversation. I'll be back with each of you again soon on the Q News Patriot. Stay safe, everyone. Thanks. Bye-bye.